Greetings and salutations and welcome back to Colin Was Right. As you may remember, last week's episode was dedicated to Xbox One and the tumultuous but still successful road the console has traveled since 2013. I figured that this week I'd give the PlayStation 4 similar treatment, chronicling its performance and perhaps most importantly, its unique library of games. Because while we'll get into a few important reasons why PS4 has done so well, its stable of exclusives represents its trump card. Xbox One and PlayStation 4 are healthy relative to historical sales data, but the PlayStation brand's future looks markedly brighter, at least partially because of its renewed emphasis on exclusivity. Make no mistake about it, PlayStation 4 is performing fantastically from a commercial standpoint. In 39 months on the market, PS4 has sold around 55 million units, which is a significant sum. It's impressive that in just north of 3 years, the PS4 has outsold GameCube by 33 million units, the original Xbox by 31 million units, and Genesis by 25 million units, all consoles on the market longer than PS4, some by a gap of several years. What's more impressive is that it's now a few million consoles ahead of Super Nintendo, only 8 million or so behind the original NES, and within striking distance of entering the top 5 best-selling consoles of all time. That's no joke, by the way. That's really a steamed company to be in. We're talking about PS2, PS1, Wii, PS3, and Xbox 360. PS4 will never surpass PS2, and that's unlikely to even reach Wii and PS1 numbers, but the fact that PS4 will rub shoulders with any of those 5 consoles is staggering. Remember, console gaming was left for absolute dead 5 years ago. Many developers foolishly abandoned core markets for social and phone gaming. Publishers invested big money in those same markets, and everyone misread the tea leaves. PS4 was supposed to be a modest success at best. Instead, it's proven many prognosticators wrong. You know how the Wii U failed to take off? That was basically the expectation for all consoles moving forward. It's also important to remember that the PS3 and Xbox 360 era lasted for fucking ever, likely due in no insignificant part to the financial crisis and the reverberating shockwaves it sent through the larger economy. Companies weren't investing, people weren't spending, and the generation was artificially extended. The SNES was on the market for 5 years when N64 came to store shelves. PS1 lasted a similar amount of time. PS2, 6 years. How about PS3, 7 years? Shit, Xbox 360, 8 years. These consoles had time to burn. There was pent-up energy for something new, sure, but the thing is, PS4 could do PS3 numbers in half the time. This level of unexpected commercial dominance has been sustained for multiple reasons. For starters, PS4's announcement in February of 2013 was nothing short of masterful. Doubling down on core gamers who were becoming increasingly disaffected by a wholesale move to mobile and social gaming they never endorsed was a stroke of genius. Sony was targeted and on point, and its messaging was substantive. PlayStation 4 got off on the right foot, and though we've had evidence this was important in the past, we got definitive proof, because Xbox One stumbled out of the gate, and as I argued last week, while it's a great console in its own right, it's never recovered from the Don-metric era, and it never will. Microsoft needs a clean slate. Sony is perfectly happy keeping the slate exactly as it is. Keep in mind that PS3's pricing, not to mention some corporate bravado, helped give Xbox 360 the upper hand. All markets are fickle. PS3's problems were microscopic compared to Xbox One's Call of Duty/sports/TV DRM always online pricing fiasco, however. The road was paved for PS4 to succeed, and as the first couple of years showed, it didn't even have to do much to differentiate itself. I truly believe that if Xbox One was conceived of and pitched better, PS4 wouldn't have had the start it did. I mean, who could forget that PS4 sold 1 million units in its first day on the market, only in the United States? It was clear from the get-go that console gaming was alive and well, and that PS4 would end up leading the charge for the duration of the generation. PlayStation 4 is most often associated with PlayStation 2 as far as sales trajectories are concerned. You may remember that Sony often made a lot of hay until more recently about how PS4 sales were actually outpacing PS2 sales. That's significant because PS2 is the best-selling home console ever by a mile. While PS1 had its own quiet march to 100 million units, and while PS3 stumbled and then regained ground at a significant clip, what's happening with PS4 is the most dramatic story of all, because it's coming at a time where console gaming was predicted to have been dying, if not dead. And these consoles aren't being sold as mere multimedia machines either. The PS2 experienced a long sales tail in part because of its DVD functionality, not to mention its elongated dominance in emerging markets. Today, PS4's multimedia suite is stacked, but it's also strangely quaint, because everything plays Netflix and Amazon and Spotify. No, people are buying PS4s to play games. 400 million of them and counting in just over 3 years. Good for about 8 games per console sold, towards the north end of historical attach rates, when PS4 is perhaps halfway through its own life cycle. This is where we get into the meat, because while all the other stuff is important, while messaging, marketing, goodwill, and luck help paint the canvas, people buy game consoles to play video games. Microsoft learned this the hard way by insisting games were secondary or even tertiary to a greater entertainment experience. It was a reasonable gamble to take, considering the buzz around the time the console was conceived and revealed, but Microsoft was wrong. Sony took the exact opposite tact, and it worked. PlayStation 4's robust catalog of exclusive AAA games, second-party partnerships, third-party exclusive arrangements, and sprawling indie scene gave and continue to give PS4 its own unique feel that brought gamers through the door and kept them engaged. This is the kind of stuff that gives consoles positive word of mouth with the most prominent purchasers and players of games, which in turn resonates outward towards more casual, inconsistent audiences. It's how a winning coalition is built, just like in politics. Hook the true believers first and expand outward from there. You can always count on your base, but ultimately, you can only win with a wider positive reaction. Now, I'm not going to sit here and make the case that most PS4s were sold with exclusives paramount in one's mind. I don't believe that. Hell, the Wii U had no shortage of defenders around the time it launched, claiming that a console could sell on first-party exclusives alone. Clearly, that's not the case. The Wii U is Nintendo's biggest mainstream bomb by a mile, but that's important because if Nintendo, the undisputed kings of the first-party ecosystem, couldn't sell a console based solely on their exclusives, PlayStation sure as hell isn't going to. What PS4 does have, however, is just about everything else. And when you add it all together, the sum total of these parts is compelling. There aren't a ton of games of contemporary consequence that can't be played on PlayStation 4. That, for most people, is enough to get them through the door. Perhaps the price is attractive, or a potential consumer's friends also play on PS4, or whatever else. Something as simple as a glowing review, an attractive deal, or a good commercial can sell a person on gaming hardware. These are the simple components of a console purchase. The fact is, the biggest games are most naturally going to be the most attractive to widest potential audiences. Call of Duty and Destiny have sold and will sell more PlayStation 4s than Sony's exclusives combined ever will. And those games will healthily outsell even the most stunning of PS4 exclusives, without much of a fight. But from here, the math grows in complexity. Because when you add all of those exclusives, big or small, first party or second party, internally published or externally published, suddenly PS4 appears to have it all. Wii U doesn't have almost any of those aforementioned quote-unquote games of contemporary consequence, while Xbox One doesn't have a hell of a lot of meaningful exclusive support. PlayStation 4 has both. It doesn't win necessarily because of exclusive content, but with exclusive content as part of its greater offering. If it was only about exclusives, Wii U wouldn't have failed. And if it was only about third-party offerings, Xbox 360's audience would have simply migrated en masse to Xbox One. Exclusives act as the essential variable that differentiates a successful console from a smash hit console. It's a far stronger proposition to have Call of Duty, Destiny, Uncharted 4, Thief's End, and Horizon Zero Dawn than just Call of Duty and Destiny. PS4's laser-like focus on exclusivity keeps asses in the seats, keeps outside interest high, and gives Sony incredible equity with gamers, as its attach rate alone proves. It's here that Sony has a whole lot of what Microsoft doesn't, and it's here that generational winners are quietly crafted and crowned. The interesting thing is that it was never clear Sony would win here either. Sony had a borderline asinine amount of exclusive support on PS3, specifically in the A and AAA realm, but rarely did one of those games truly break into the mainstream. Meanwhile, Sony's exclusive suite of PS4 games, while fewer in number, were slow to market and often underwhelming in the console's first 2 years. This went for both internally developed first-party games and second-party exclusives. Killzone Shadowfall and Infamous Second Son were both good games, but neither were top-tier fantastic experiences. Coupled with the disappointing Knack, the chronically late and perpetually broken Drive Club, and the epic letdown that was The Order 1886, it didn't seem like Sony was preparing a competitive slate of must-own PS4 exclusives, nor did it seem to really matter either. After all, PS3 had exclusives up the wazoo, but only the hardcore cared, and PS4 was selling huge numbers without any critical darling exclusives. But then things changed, and it turns out that this change matters a great deal. Sony may have missed the mark early on, but it wisely planted seeds all the while that merely took time to grow, as seeds sometimes do. Interestingly, it was two second-party AAA exclusives launched in 2015, Bloodborne and Until Dawn, that got the ball rolling. The former showed Sony's astute understanding of its error in letting the Souls franchise get away at its embryonic state, while the latter showed a dedication to a completely novel concept and playstyle. Both were hugely popular with PlayStation 4 audiences, and that was only the beginning. 2016 gave us Ratchet & Clank and Uncharted 4: Thief's End, two phenomenal games that sold extremely well. Later in 2016 came the long-awaited The Last Guardian. Early 2017 brought the ever-niche Gravity Rush 2 and the fantastic and unique open-world game Horizon Zero Dawn. And this doesn't even include all the vital third-party and/or externally published exclusives either, ranging from Neo and Tales of Berseria to Persona 5 and Nier Automata. Those aforementioned first-party seedlings will be sprouting in the coming years in such a way that momentum should be sustained, especially when combined with all of the third-party games many of us can't wait to get our hands on, not to mention endless slews of indies and other occasional surprises that prove to us just how big a backlog can get. Days Gone, Spider-Man, God of War, The Last of Us Part 2, Death Stranding, Gran Turismo Sport, Dreams, Detroit Become Human, and more are still in the pipeline. All of that is music to the ears of current and prospective PS4 owners alike. I think we can all agree that last week's video on Xbox One was mostly positive and entirely fair, so you may be wondering how and why the PS4 video is even more positive. I think the response to that inquiry is fairly evident. PlayStation 4 is a better console than Xbox One, with a better library. A console doesn't outsell its competition by more than 2 to 1 if it's not doing a lot of things right. That's not to say Xbox One isn't great in its own right. And as I made the case last week, it's also not to say that Xbox One isn't a success too. It's just to say that PlayStation 4 has had a great run so far, and the next few years are looking great too, especially when you throw the potentially positive effects PSVR and PS4 Pro will have on the ecosystem. If Microsoft wants to replicate Sony's success next generation, then I simply say do this. Do exactly what Sony's already done, because it's a formula that works, and works well. That's all for this week's episode of Colin Was Right. There won't be a regular episode next week, though I'm pleased to announce that in its place, I will be posting 5 interviews in a sub-series called A Conversation with Colin Was Right, where I've invited industry professionals to Kinda Funny Studios to discuss issues I brought up on the show. So look for interviews with Jason Schreier, Mike Bithell, Adam Boyes, Jeremy Dunham, and Dan Edelman next week. Until then, have a fantastic rest of your day.